the global war on terrorism, Operation Enduring Freedom.
What branch of the service?
Army.
What is your highest rank?
I'm currently a major.
In which general locations did you serve?
In my 2 tours in Afghanistan, I served first in Ghazni province from about April 2006 till November of 2006. And then we moved to Lagman province, Metharlam, and I was there from December 2006 until April 2007. On my second tour, I was posted at Torkham Gate, the Khyber Pass, on the Pakistan border, which is in Nangarhar province. And I was there from February of 2009. Excuse me. Was it 2009? Wow, I'm drawing a blank right now. We got back in November of 10. So I was only there, February of 2010 until June of 2010. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right.
And then I moved again to the Kargai district of Lagman province from June until we left in November of 2010.
Frank, let's talk about how you got in the service. Why did you enlist?
Well, as a small child, I always knew I wanted to serve in my nation's military. I come from a family of immigrants, and my great-grandfather came to this country when he was 3 years old in 1903. And when World War I came about, he was 17 years old about that, and he wasn't even a U.S. citizen, and he signed up and went and fought in World War I as a doughboy from New York City, the Bronx, actually. And he came home and he earned his citizenship, I believe in 1919. I have the census record at home. And then my grandfathers both served in World War II. In the Navy. I guess they're the smart ones. And then one of them went on to serve in Korea down in Washington at the Pentagon as a radio man because he had that skill. Most of my great uncles served in Korea, either Army, infantry, or engineers, or Navy. My mother's brother served in Vietnam. And multiple cousins in the military. And I just thought it was a natural thing for me to do. I was drawn to it. It was, I don't know, I guess for me it was one of those things that it just seemed to be natural.
From when you were a little kid?
From when I was a little kid, like, you join the military, that's what you do. So as soon as I could, I was actually 12 years old when I wrote the Army recruiter. I have that letter still that saying I was too young. And then when I wanted to go to West Point, and I ended up going to Valley Forge Military Academy in college in Pennsylvania with the idea that I would matriculate into West Point or Annapolis at a very young age. I was 15 when I left home, and I stayed there through high school, and I ended up not getting into the service academies, but I received an early commission where I got my commission as a sophomore in college, which is a program that I believe, if the story is correct, the early commissioning program was started by General Marshall and General Eisenhower, and Valley Forge was the school that was selected to start that program. So it was a great honor to be a part of that. So I received my commission there in the Army. And I branched engineers, and then I rebranched to infantry. So I don't know if you want to get further into my military career or more about my deployments, but...
More about, we'll get to your deployments.
Sure.
Now, So you went to high school there.
Yep.
And what did were you commissioned while you were still in high school?
No, ma'am. The school is a military type private school, but no affiliation to the United States Army or anything. So we are not enlisted, but it is a military type school. Uniforms every day, marching, drill and ceremony, discipline. So at a very young age, I understood the roles and responsibilities of a leader, what it took of mission accomplishment, teamwork, right time, right place, right uniform, integrity, honor, being a whole person, I guess, that school
So you
taught
could
me.
graduate from that school and not have a commitment?
Yes, no commitment if you graduate from that school.
When did you actually enlist and commit?
I signed my contract for ROTC and was assessed in on 12 November 1998. And I was a cadet, MS3. And I also did the simultaneous membership program, which pays you at the grade of E5, but you are a cadet. And I served in the 103rd Combat Engineers out in the Pennsylvania Guard.
Now, did you have to go to basic training since you already had a lot of that?
I had to go to basic camp because of the program that I was in. I wouldn't call basic training, but we did have drill sergeants. And I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and that was the summer of 1998 before I started my first year of college there.
What was that like that summer?
It was my first indoctrination to the real Army, drill sergeants in their campaign hats. The yelling and discipline really didn't bother me because I had already gone through that as a 15-year-old with high school students who I think are a little bit more brutal than American drill sergeants. So it was really not that big of a deal. My first taste of, doing PT and doing some of the challenges that we had there in the Army at Fort Knox, but that was it.
Was that summer camp just for other cadets like you who had been to military school?
No. There was a lot of cadets there who had decided to get into the program very late, and that's how they needed to catch up, is do that program. But my program requires that we had to do it, so it didn't matter. So we go regardless. Didn't matter what we had previously.
So after that summer, you went into college?
I was a freshman at Valley Forge, first year college student. There's only 2 years there, freshman, sophomore. So I was an MS3. I served as the cadet mounted battalion commander, 4th highest ranking cadet there that year. And then I moved up to the regimental executive officer towards the end of the year. And then I finished out that year, and then we went to our advanced camp, which was at Fort Lewis, which is our last formal training before our commissioning. And then once that was complete, I went back to Valley Forge, and I was the regimental commander. I was made the regimental commander. I was the highest ranking cadet in the Corps. I had the 72nd Corps of cadets. And I finished that year out with a pretty strong record, best cadet in the Corps, commander of the Anthony Wayne Legion Guard, and I received my commission as an engineer officer in the Pennsylvania Guard.
And what did you do after that?
Well, I was accepted to Georgetown University as a junior, because I had finished 2 years of college. They accepted most of my credits. And I majored in history with a minor in political science, or government as they called it. And I did 2 years at Georgetown University. I had my commission. I was in the Pennsylvania Guard. And on September 11th, 2001, I think that was the day my life changed.
Where were you?
I got up that morning because I had to meet my Pennsylvania National Guard unit commander. He was down in D.C. for work, and he wasn't going to be at drill that weekend. And I was going to be in charge of the company, and he wanted to meet me. So that morning I got up early, like I normally did, got dressed, grabbed a cab and shot down to Pennsylvania Avenue. We had a very quick meeting, and I was in the cab, and by the time I got back, the first plane had struck the tower. A friend of mine had called me that was in Pennsylvania and told me to turn on my TV. And then I don't remember the exact sequence of events, but no one really knew what was going on until the second tower and then the Pentagon strike. And that day, school was closed. No one was allowed off campus. I do remember the reserves being called out in DC and on the corners, every corner in a Humvee, heavy weapons. It was very interesting as an American citizen to see that. But comforting for me, I took comfort in the fact that it was happening. That orderly and DC was pretty much.
Did they call you out at all?
No. If I do recall, I was still in the Pennsylvania Guard. The governor of the state of Pennsylvania did not call us up. I know that my unit was an engineer unit and had hauling assets, but the offer of assistance was made to New York, but they didn't want it. So we did a normal drilling weekend, which was very strange to a lot of the soldiers, including myself. After that, we went back to, I don't want to say life as usual, but things started changing slowly but surely. My Pennsylvania Guard unit was called up to go to Germany to do gate guard. That's when all the Noble Eagle at the airport and stuff, and they got called to go to Germany. I didn't go because I had not gone to my basic course at Fort Leonard Wood. I was scheduled to go in February of 2003. So really the war in Afghanistan started to kick off, and I went home after I graduated college. I didn't have a job at that point because I was going to OBC. I went home and did odd jobs until February came, and then I ended up going to Fort Leonard Wood. I completed my basic course. Then I went to sapper school. I completed that, and then I got notification I was going to law school. But prior to law school, I tried to get into active duty, which I thought was very weird. With everything going on, that I couldn't just go into active duty, and it's just like every time I turned around, I found a roadblock. I wanted to go, and then when I was in school, we launched the invasion in Iraq. I mean, when I was at the engineer basic course, we watched the 3rd Infantry Division go over the berm. At least I think it was them. Went over the berm. We watched it on TV. They invaded Iraq. We stopped class that day and just watched what was going on. Again, another day that changed my life. I still had the idea to go to law school. You know, my unit was not getting called up to support. I don't think the National Guard was really getting involved in the combat operations, which I think kind of eats at you a little bit. So that was my drive to get in. But to this day, I still don't know why I couldn't go. But whatever. It's
So did you go to law school then?
So I got into Quinnipiac Law School, and I started January of 2004. And that was an eye-opener. I think sapper school was easier. Law school is for a different breed of people. I went, I did the best I could. I continued, and then I got transferred to the 102nd Infantry. And that's when we got the alert that we were going. And at that point, I made the decision that it was my turn. I guess I could have stayed and used some exemption, but...
So you had been in the Pennsylvania Guard and they transferred you to the Connecticut?
Well, I had decided once I was done with sapper school that I was moving back to Connecticut. I wasn't going to drive continuously back down to Pennsylvania. So I transferred to the Connecticut Guard, and then I got into law school, and this is where my family and everyone's from. So at that point, I decided to take a leave of absence from law school and get ready to deploy, which was good. I was also working at the Hartford Armory for Colonel Lukowski. I was doing his historical preservation stuff in the environmental shop. So I took a leave of absence. I just worked, and we got ready to deploy. And then we mobilized 5 5 or 6 January 2006, and the unit had to go to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I was then made the executive officer. Prior to that, I was a support platoon leader in Bravo Company, 242 engineers. Then I was made the XO of, let me back up. Then I was made a platoon leader in Bravo Company, 102nd Infantry, and then made the XO of Delta Company, 1st 102nd Infantry, which was a new company that we had to stand up per the MTO that came out for light infantry units. And I deployed to Fort Bragg as the XO, and we went through training from January to March at Fort Bragg. It was good. It got us ready to go.
What kinds of things did you train in?
We did everything: weapons qualification, individual training, collective training from squad, platoon, and company. We did FOB defense, convoy operations, obviously getting ready for the COIN fight, counterinsurgency fight. But we also did some conventional stuff, learned how to do village assessments. So as the Delta Company XO, I was tasked to go ahead of the entire unit to Afghanistan in the end of March, early April. I think it was about April 3rd, I finally got to Afghanistan after we had left from Fort Bragg. We had ended up driving to BWI, getting on a commercial flight, taking the commercial flight all the way over, stopping in Germany. I think it was Leipzig. We stopped in Leipzig, and then we ended up stopping in Turkey, which was very odd to me. We got to Incirlik, I believe it's called, and we couldn't get off the plane till it got dark. No one could see us. We went into this place. It was very odd. Got back on the plane at Incirlik, stopped at Kyrgyzstan, at Manis. We were there for a couple days, and then we started flowing into theater in Afghanistan, and I landed in Bagram. And in Bagram, we started setting up the logistics and how we were going to greet the entire 700-plus man battalion and all their equipment into theater. So the units started flowing in. We started pushing everybody out to their different FOBs because we had the Provincial Reconstruction Team mission, which split all our platoons up. We didn't fight as an organic battalion, as a security forces mission for the Provincial Reconstruction Teams. But at that point, I didn't have a job because the XOs really weren't needed, I guess, because it was going to be platoon operations, not company level. So that is when my battalion commander, Colonel Gilbert, tapped me on the shoulder and said, "I want you to be one of my staff officers." And I was made the, at that time it was called the S5, the Civil Military Operations Officer. And my job as a 25, 26-year-old was to interact with all levels of government down to the lowest level, the village level, and see what services that we could bring to the people of Afghanistan and where we were in order to separate the people from the enemy. I did a lot of education and medical initiatives where we were in Ghazni, and that was from the direction of Colonel Gilbert.
So you were actually stationed in Ghazni? I
was in Ghazni province, at FOB Ghazni, which is a very historical location in the history of Afghanistan. The kingdoms that were there, you could see the old fortress and the old castle that was up on a hill. There were a lot of ruins around there, but it was a very big city as far as Afghan standards are concerned. Roads and water and whatnot, which we take for granted here. Shops, tons of little bazaars. But in that province, which was unique about Afghanistan or Ghazni, was that the Minister of Education and the Minister of Health were both females. And we had made a determination at that point, in order to make those directorates successful and make the female politicians successful, was to support them. what seemed to happen prior to is that they were always left to the side. But these two women we worked with were extremely educated, extremely dedicated individuals. The Minister of Health, she had gone to medical school, I believe, in Pakistan. And the Minister of Education, and I don't remember their names, I know their faces if I saw them. The Minister of Education, when the Taliban had taken control of Afghanistan, she had decided to go against them and teach everybody that was willing to learn, specifically little girls in her own home at night, and parents that were willing to send their kids, and she did. When I was there, it was unfortunate. There was a couple plots to kill her, but we were fortunate enough to intercept that intelligence and call her up and tell her, but she usually knew before we knew anyway. But we went out and supported schools. We would bring needed supplies that they needed. Kids didn't have books or pencils, and I know it sounds trivia in the middle of a conflict, but what we were trying to do and what I think we did was that we couldn't affect an adult, but what we did was we affected the child. So the child knew the importance of education, knew that Americans with Afghans were there to make them safe and allow them to go to school and get an education so they could be a productive member of their own society and culture, so that they could read a book at some point. When you have a country that's illiterate, a lot of the signs, you see a lot of signs in Pashtun or the multiple language that Afghans speak. They're kind of useless when people can't read.
So did you actually have a base that you were separate from the people, or were you actually in the community?
No, we still had security measures to worry about. That year was the worst year of combat that had come since we had invaded Afghanistan, and we lost. I know since then it's gone higher and higher, but we lost the most soldiers in 06 and 07. That was one of the worst years of combat. We were on our own fob, to answer your question. It was separated from the city. It was down the road from an old Russian helicopter base. It was still intact. The Afghan army had taken that over and were rebuilding that. It needed a lot of work. Still had the helicopter pads, the runway that the Russians had put in. It was all metal girdered pads. It was very interesting how they threw it together. That was right outside the city. But we were separate enough. But that year, we were rocketed, I remember, was it June? 12 times in June. And then we had 11 IED strikes. We lost Sergeant Corpus, who was attached to us from active duty, who was buried in Arlington. Colonel Gilbert's truck got hit. No one lost, thank God. Captain Pickle, now Major Pickle, his truck was hit. No one was killed, thank God.
And this was right on your base?
No, this was out on patrols, but not far from the base. So,
when you'd go to work every day, did you leave the base and go and work?
Some days, it depended on my schedule. What we did was that we'd come up with a plan on where we wanted to go and affect the population. So we'd go places on the map that no one had been. We looked at what the unit had done prior, and we tried to expand that out with the little amount of soldiers that we had at that point. I had 9 guys and 3 trucks, and we'd go out on our own. They all didn't necessarily work for me, but we'd all go out on our own and do these village assessments, and we'd try to follow our campaign plan for the region and try to go to the red areas and let them know what our purpose was, and we try to go to the yellow areas and turn them green. And there was a coloring coding system that we had based off of intelligence and the village assessments that I'd go conduct and sit down with. And then we'd try to prop up the green areas where we got a lot of support, and the people in the other 2 areas would see that village is getting a well, or they're getting a new school, or we're bringing humanitarian assistance, and we try to use that propaganda to turn them. So, but some days I'd sit on the base and just do my paperwork, type in all my village assessments, communicate with the rest of the staff or higher. And some days I'd be out for a couple days, a day, an afternoon. It really depended on what was going on.
How many villages during that year that you were there? I mean, are we talking a few or a dozen or dozens?
Hundreds.
You visited hundreds of villages to assess them?
We had to. And a village could be as small as 5 houses to as big as 150 houses. And we could spend 20 minutes there on the ground talking to them and know we weren't getting anywhere with them and we'd leave. Or we knew we were making some headway and we were getting some real good intelligence on where we were going. But I would say hundreds. I feel confident in that answer. And some we would revisit, and I would count that because we'd go, come back, a couple weeks later we'd go. So we'd do this all the time.
What was your most common reception by the people?
It was, I don't know, I mean, I always ask, a lot of people ask me that, and I'd say, well, how would you feel if someone from a different country in a uniform was coming into your town? And they think about it for a minute, but I said, usually Afghans were pretty smart. They knew how to play the game, and they knew normally that we were coming. If we had a trailer or not, that meant they were probably going to get something. They're very poor. They need a lot of stuff, but they're survivors. It was usually warm. You knew when you were going to a bad spot. You could feel it. You could see it. You know, the stories of the kids not being out, that was kind of true. The kids, I think, are the bravest people over there because they didn't care. They either looking for food or a piece of candy or get their picture taken. But we went into some bad ones where it was very cold, where I wouldn't even drink the tea if they gave it to me. So,
what were the most requested or needed services?
Well, everybody in Afghanistan needs water. It's very dry, very sandy. But, you know...
So rather than just give them water, you drilled wells?
We tried. Some places you couldn't. Sometimes they lived in really not the most habitable spot. And we also had a Department of Agriculture representative there in our fob, and he'd say, you know, we got to be careful on how many wells we're digging, the water table and whatnot. So we had to be careful about that. So we kind of, at one point, we realized we had to get out of the well drilling business.
Did you have the actual well drilling equipment?
Well, no. That's great. You asked that question. What I also had to do was contract with Afghans. So I had to get a list of people that could do the business, that had the equipment, the knowledge, the expertise, and I had to contract with them. And then I would have to make sure they were doing it right. So I'd have to go visit those sites, and then I'd have to pay them at the end. So I did full federal acquisitions in the middle of Afghanistan on top of government relations, on top of town relations, on top of information operations and psychological warfare operations. At 26, 27, I did more than most, I would say, 40-year-olds in the United States that do government relations. And I did it in a combat zone. I pat my back on that because I had no idea what the hell I was doing. I was told to do it, and I did it.
On the job training.
Right.
When you would go into a village, drill them a well, and you leave there and they now have fresh water, did that change their opinion of the Americans?
I'd say yes and no. I mean, who do you think else was using that well? They didn't have guards on it 24/7. Whoever had the bigger guns, I guess, could use the well, right? So that's why we also kind of got out of the well drilling business. And that's why we started focusing on education and health. Because it was important.
What kinds of things did you do for education and health?
Health, well, we focused on, they called them med caps. We would support med caps where we'd go to a larger village or a village that had a clinic, and we'd provide them standard medicines. We'd get a list from the clinic what they needed, and I would contract to buy it, and we'd go drop it off. And they'd have a big day of people coming in and getting shots or cough medicine. We supported the local hospital in Ghazni. The Minister of Health would usually tell me what she needed, and we would purchase it. And we'd kind of try to put an Afghan face on it, so we wouldn't go. We'd give her what was needed and let her deliver it, which was good. Education, I had desks built, 3 kid desks to put in a school that had no desks or chairs. We bought tons of pens and paper and notebooks and backpacks for the little kids, and we'd go to the schools in the middle of school and hand them out to them. Radios, so they could hear the national news. Building walls around schools. NGOs would go into these towns and just put these beautiful schools up, but the people wouldn't use them because there's no wall. So I think one of the neatest projects we did is that we went into this this village that had a big, beautiful stone school. It wasn't being used because there was no wall. And the idea was to see if the people would support on top of contribute to our, like match our contribution. And they did. They helped pay for that wall as well as paid as much as we did for that wall. And they used the school. And one stipulation was that boys and girls could go, and they would. And they split the day in half. And I thought that was a success. So what people were saying in the news, they weren't getting the right answer on the ground. And I also did public affairs on top of everything else. And I had 11 different news media outlets come and embed with us. And everybody hated me.
From the United States?
From everywhere. From Greek Mega TV, from France.
You had 11 of them embedded with you?
At different times throughout the year. France, Greece, the Chicago Tribune, U.S. News and World Report, which I have a copy of the magazine. Trying to think what else. Sky TV Britain. We had them all, and I'd embed them, or they'd come with me.
Did they live on the base with you?
Yep, they lived on the base, and if we went on mission, they'd come with us.
How did that work? Were you satisfied with that? Did they get in the way, or they fit in okay?
You know, I think in World War II we did it right when we had the embedded reporters through. I don't remember the exact name of how they did it. Instead of what we have done is willy-nilly, everybody can come, because we've determined in the United States that the American people and everybody have the right to know under the First Amendment. I actually wrote a paper about that, and I don't think the Supreme Court has ever really answered the question about media embedded with the military. I don't know what their purpose is, because I still don't think they write the accurate report of what's going on.
Do you think by being embedded with you that their reporting was any more accurate?
Well, I'll say this. I usually debrief them before they left, and I wanted to hear the gist of their story. And 9 times out of 10, it was pretty accurate. And I didn't say I made sure, but I checked. There was a couple times that it wasn't. And I did send an email to them saying, what you wrote was incorrect. What you wrote was untrue. And you're going to have to live with that. They are. There was little to no integrity in those people's reporting. It's the way I feel.
So you were here at Ghazni for a year?
I was at Ghazni.
Doing all those things?
Yep, I was at Ghazni from about April to November, and then I went home on leave because I wanted to go home for Thanksgiving. I got to come home. I spent my time at home here in Connecticut with my family. And then I went back, and I got stuck in Bagram. Bagram was snowed in, it was freezing, it was cold, and I couldn't get a flight. And while I was gone, the unit had moved from Ghazni because the brigade had changed the battle space. We moved to Lagman province. So we went from a really, really high location that was really, really cold, which I missed the Afghan winter, to a very, very low location that was very, very hot in December, 65 degrees. But I got back, and on December 15th, we had another IED strike. And I was.
Was this at Ghazni or your?
It was his Methar Lamb. It was in the Alashang, the Alashang Valley, and there was an IED strike, and Staff Sergeant Joe Fanoff, who was one of the guys that I got to work with throughout the year, I got to meet him, was killed in an IED strike, and that sucked. He was a really nice guy. And that was his second deployment. He had volunteered. He already went to Iraq. He was a logistics NCO, signal NCO, and he was killed. It was unfortunate.
Now, you had already returned?
I was at Bagram. I had missed that mission. I couldn't get back, but I had found out when I was at Bagram, and I was there at the hospital when they issued, his last rites. Father Converse had done that, and it was sad. I try to go and visit him every time I'm in D.C. He's buried in Arlington with Bernard Corpus. So that kind of hit us hard. Being a National Guard unit and being such a community organization, that's hard. I mean, it hits any unit hard. How could it not? We're like a family. And the rest of the year, I continued doing the same mission, but in a different location.
Was it comparable to what you were doing in Ghazni?
No, completely different feel, different reception.
How so? Describe how it was.
I can't put my finger on it.
Was it still similar kinds of villages?
Yes, all look the same, just a little bit different as far as the people. I think the people in Ghazni, if this makes any sense, were a little bit warmer than the people in Methar Lamb and Lagman, where we were. I don't know if that was just the terrain that made it so, because Lagman province was so mountainous. And there was two rivers. I have the map. I have to look again. But
your mission was the same, to go out
the same mission.
Yep. To help them.
Yep. Separate the enemy from the population was my mandate.
Was it easy to tell the enemy from the population?
No, it's not easy. It's not easy at all.
How would you tell?
If we were getting shot at.
So it was really just blatant attack.
Yeah. We couldn't walk into a location and just be like, you're a Taliban. No one, or you're Al Qaeda, or you're HIG, or whatever. We'd know when we got shot at. There's a lot of react to contact in Afghanistan.
So there's got to be a lot of uncertainty when you're going into these villages. You really don't know what you're going into.
Yep.
You could be going into a friendly village or an unfriendly.
Very unfriendly village. Student of history, as I said before, I read a lot of books about Afghanistan. I think it's very telling on how the British fought in that terrain with no vehicles, no modern amenities. It's pretty impressive how those guys used to march up in those mountains and get into firefights like they did. No helicopters, no airplanes. And everyone talking about the British, everyone talks about the Battle of Mewan and when they left Kabul the first time, but they gave as good as they got, that's for sure. So I read a lot about that, and the terrain really dictates the fight there. So if you don't read history before you go to that country, you're going to be behind the eight ball, I think.
Was the terrain vastly different at Ghazni and the Lagman province?
Yes, Ghazni's on a flat, giant plain with mountains way, way out there. There's mountainous locations, but Lagman is just mountain after mountain after mountain after mountain.
Let's talk about the amenities in your daily life. When you were at Ghazni, you were on base.
Yeah.
What were your living conditions like?
I had a bedroom. It was pretty.
So you had a regular bedroom?
Well, it was. They called them bee huts. I lived in a concrete bee hut. I don't know how the nickname came about, but it's one of those army things, or military things. It's called a bee hut. This is hilarious. We lived in buildings that were concrete, and the concrete walls on the outside had to be like thick. I'm talking like nothing was getting through that. But the roof was soft. It was just a roof. There was nothing that made it fortified. So, and what happened is it was an open bay, but there was enough plywood, obviously, and everyone built cubicles, kind of, I guess, or little rooms. And I lived by myself, room with my desk and had all my amenities there, and was quite comfortable in there. And then I had my desk in the staff location where I worked every morning, and in the headquarters building. And
was that another concrete building?
Yes, another concrete building, thick walls with not a very fortified roof. And then there was the inner compound in Gosney, and then the outer walls were pushed out. I mean, the whole perimeter on the outside, I think, was about a mile or more. So we used to run and do PT there, and the gym. Some days you get to work out twice a day just because it was a down day. Chow was standard Army chow.
You had a mess hall? You had 3 meals a day?
Not 3 meals. Depends. Sometimes we had to go off post, but usually there was 3 meals, which was nice. But I was used to Army food because I went to a military high school. The food was about the same. So it didn't bother me. Obviously, I like my mother's food and my grandmother's food, but it didn't bother me. I got to do a couple times where I got to get in the back and help cook, which was fun. It was a break from the monotony on some of the days, And then when we went to Logman, vastly different. Lived in a wood building, plywood walls with sandbags on the side, soft roof again, and a very, very small cubicle that I had to build a loft bed. I don't know how it was standing, and I had a little desk and some shelves. And I pretty much left all my stuff packed up, and I only took out what I needed. And I worked 3 or 4 bee huts down where we built the command tactical operations cell, and then before the end of that, we ended up moving into the new tactical operations cell, which was a big giant concrete building, and my office was back there. Which was funny was that the second tour, and when I left the first tour, I never thought I'd go back, but when we got back the second tour and I went to Torkham Gate, it was new. I was in the famous Khyber Pass. That was a very political mission, and then I ended up going back to Logman, to the original fob where I had left, and everything had changed.
It
had changed. It was amazing how much it had changed. So we finished out our tour in April of 2007. I was one of the last people out. I did a year and 13 days on the ground on the first tour, total of 18 months for the deployment. And I came home in May.
Of 2007?
2007.
And then how long before you went for your second deployment?
Well, in between, I had taken a little bit more time off. I finished some military education, my captain's career course, and I rebranched to infantry. I went to airborne school, and then I started going back to law school. Again, I was working at the Hartford Armory. And then I interned a couple jobs and was still going to law school. We got the alert notification that we were going again in 2008. Late 2008, 2009, and luckily for me, I was able to finish law school, and I finished, and then I came back on orders in the middle of July of 2009, and I got my company ready. I was now Charlie Company Commander, Charlie Company 1st, 102nd Infantry, so I was the Delta Company XO, staff officer, went back to being the Company XO, and then made Charlie Company Commander, which is here in New Britain, right over there on the east side of the town. That was my company, which we started in Bristol and then moved over here. And we got ready to go, and we were alerted, and we went to Camp Atterbury in
This was in July of '09.
July in '09, but November of '09 we ended up going to Camp Atterbury. We spent another Thanksgiving away from home. Camp Atterbury is one of the coldest places I've ever been to in my life, and I don't even know how that's possible. It's in Indiana. You would think Connecticut. It was cold. It was miserable too. It's
And
like
what were you doing? A training?
training, doing infantry training, ranges, convoy operations. Again, pretty much the same thing, but we knew this time we were doing full spectrum operations as an infantry battalion, which we needed to do a lot more combat focused training. We got to come home for Christmas and the New Year holiday, which was good. And then we went right back to Atterbury. We finished up, and then we redeployed to Fort Polk, Louisiana, to do a National Training Center rotation to get ready for full spectrum operations, and that was Fort Polk, Louisiana. So remember, I said Indiana was cold. The Connecticut Infantry Battalion, 102nd Infantry, went from Indiana the cold to Fort Polk, Louisiana, which everyone thinks it's going to be hot in February. No, it was cold. And I asked the lady, we were in the chow hall one morning, I said, wow, I cannot believe how cold it is. She said, I can't either. It is the coldest it's ever been here. I said, obviously, the 102nd Infantry is here, so of course it's going to be cold. So the Charlie Company performed very well at JRTC. I was very proud of my soldiers for what they did there. We accomplished a lot of great things and came together as a team there, and we got ready to go to Afghanistan. I was told we were going to go to Torkham Gate, but I want to back up. I want to say, graduating law school from Quinnipiac, they were very supportive of me and my military service. And at the end, I had put them in for an award that's really not for a school, but they were like my employer, and I put them in for outstanding support to the Guard and Reserve, and I presented that to the school. They had no idea. And the dean of the school, Dean Saxon, he gave a great speech. I was really touched by it. And then the next day at graduation, our speaker, one of my professors, he had mentioned me a few times. And I was very supportive of my military career, and it made my time at law school finishing out that much more enjoyable. So, but we ended up finishing at Fort Polk, and then we deployed from Fort Polk right to Afghanistan, Torkham Gate. I got there, and my job yet again was something I had never done. I was to manage the border crossing between Afghanistan and Pakistan. It wasn't very combat intensive. It was more political than anything. I had to deal with the Pakistani military and security forces. I had to deal with the Afghan border police, the Afghan army, the Afghan custom police, the civil bureaucracy of the Afghan border administration, the town police, the mayor of that town, and then all the U.S. and joint operations or joint military and civilian personnel.
Was your base right there on the border?
It was about 1.5 miles away from the border.
So you were close.
We were very close.
How big of a base did
It wasn't as big as Ghazni, and it wasn't as big as Methar-Lam, but my base, and I was in charge of it, was pretty good size. There was we called it the castle. It looked like a castle because it had a couple rotundas there that we could, on the inner perimeter. But we were expanding while we were there. And I had entities I can't really talk about on my base. And I had Task Force Biometrics, Task Force, what were they called? The border. These guys were all ex-customs and border people that were there working for Customs and Border Patrol, helping us out. I had other Army units there working, and then my company. And we were down at the gate 16 plus hours a day monitoring what came through and what left the gate. It was very boring for my guys.
really?
Yeah, Very boring. That's not what they trained to do.
And did they do that for a whole year?
Almost. We were tasked to be there 24/7. And it was really hinging or dependent upon the Afghans wanting to do their job. But we were there for security purposes. Down at Torkham Gate, we had a couple IEDs. We had one very small attack on the base. No one got hurt, thank God. We responded appropriately. But what happened in the middle of the tour, that I had gotten this mission because it was General McChrystal and then General Petraeus's, one of their top 10 ISAF things that needed to be accomplished. One of their strategic goals is to get that border under control. And because 25+% of Afghans' GNP, gross national product, comes through that gate. The revenue they collect and the commerce that happens. You can't have a government or a country stand on its own 2 feet if they don't have any money. So I understood that at the strategic level. But my challenge as a company commander was to keep my guys engaged and keep them focused on that mission because they hated it.
How did you do that as a company commander?
Every day was something different. Every day was something different. I mean, on Memorial Day, I think it was Memorial Day, I closed the whole gate down. I closed the whole base down. We had a competition between the soldiers. On the 4th of July, I had an ice cream social. You know, simple things like that to try to keep motivated and give them their time, because I knew it was difficult for a lot of those guys they're infantry guys. They want to go do their job. So I ended up being able to communicate to my active duty battalion commander, who I answered to, as it was his battle space, that we needed to do patrols along the border, and he granted us that ability to do so. So I got them off base to do other things than guard the gate. That was huge.
Did you have any incidents at the gate while you were guarding it?
As far as
combat?
No, there was no firefights down at the gate when it was open, because, and I'll tell you, and everybody knew, it was beneficial for every party that was involved to keep that gate open.
It benefited Pakistan as much as it benefited Afghanistan.
Absolutely. And all the insurgent groups. Why not? They could smuggle stuff in the border. To take a truck down, one truck, to search one truck, they have no regulations on how they pack trucks or how tall it could be. There's no overpasses. It would take my guys 8 hours, because the truck driver was only one person, and we didn't have a troop of Afghans to download the truck and load it back up.
Your guys had to do that?
Yeah. That was, so they had the detection machines, and they had a working dog down there. If there was a hit, they would tear the whole truck apart, and the gate would get closed down. And then I'd get a phone call from echelons above me why the gate was closed down. Just doing our job. So we tried to catch as much stuff as we could, and we tried to allow the flow of commerce the best we could, and we did. And
what kinds of things would you try to catch that were not allowed?
Fertilizer. But how do you tell an agrarian society they can't have fertilizer?
How do you do that?
Try to keep it within the quantity regulations, but what are the regulations? You'd get one answer from the Border Patrol, one answer from the Afghan Customs. My mission there was very difficult, mentally and physically, I think. Just because of the amount of oversight, the politics that played in it. How high visibility it was, how important it was all the way up to the national level. At one point, we were waiting for Janet Napolitano to come visit us, getting ready for that visit, but she had canceled. I had a 1-star general at least once a week on my base from every country that was a part of the coalition, at least, or a full bird colonel.
How big was that base? Like how many men were you there?
Whole infantry company. I would probably say 200 plus. I had 200 guys.
Was it a full service base? Did you have all the amenities?
I had my own chow section. We did mail. We had all the showers. MWR was on post. We had it all. We had it all.
How was the mail service? Did you get mail regularly?
All the time, yeah. All the time, no problems.
How did you stay in touch with your family?
Email.
You had computers at all the places?
Well, obviously, most of my communication was done over computers. So, as company commander, I had my own computer so I could email home. I guess that was a perk of the job, So, email, which I think is a shame. There's all those letters and stuff from the previous conflicts that now are lost in cyberspace. That's why I try to keep all my emails, and I did have them, and then I just deleted them all by accident, and I'm pretty sick to my stomach about that. So I saved the ones I could. So, because I wish I had the letters that my great-grandfather wrote home, or, I have letters from the Civil War that people wrote back home. It was just...
And then you don't have your own.
No, you don't have your own letters. I tried to keep as many from the first deployment because a lot of people sent a lot of mail that time, but the second one they didn't. So I finished up my tour at Torkham Gate because our battalion commander at the time, Colonel Yvonne, determined that there was a company commander that wasn't really doing a very good job and needed to move. The soldiers needed him to move. So I was called and asked if I would take that company and rehabilitate the soldiers. And I accepted the job. It was bitter.
You had to leave your own?
I had to leave my own guys. But I had talked to them and they understood. And they knew that that unit needed me more than they did. And that I was going to leave the company with my company executive officer, Captain Jason D'Souza, who they all really cared for a great deal, and that they felt a lot better knowing that I was going to go and make that unit better and keep them in good hands.
Where did you have to go for this other company?
So I took Alpha Company then in the middle of deployment, 1st 102nd Infantry, which currently resides out of Norwalk, Connecticut. At the time, they were at FOB Zeahawk, which was in the Kargai district of Lagman Province, which was south of Metharlam. And we had our own FOB. It was a company-sized FOB, and I had an Afghan Army battalion, and I had a civil affairs team and an MP platoon on that base. And when I got to that base, the soldiers were so unmotivated and things were so disorganized. I felt really bad for those guys. And I got to work probably that night changing things immediately. The vision and the culture had to change at that unit immediately, and I did.
What was the first thing you did?
The previous company commander did all his business in his bedroom and didn't have a location to go work at. I stopped that immediately. I didn't want anybody in my room. That was my room. I rearranged the entire TOC and set up locations for everyone to have a spot to work in and go to. I rearranged the entire organization of the unit as far as who was doing what. We had an MP platoon on that base to mentor and work with the police. They weren't doing that. They were doing that responsibility with one of my infantry platoons. That stopped that night. Each infantry platoon was assigned to an Afghan Army company that was on that base, and each platoon mentored a company that was their partner company. I broke down the entire district into platoon-sized areas of operation and gave each platoon leader their own responsible locations. I built a rotation. Previously, the commander before me, he kept one platoon on base defense. That's all they did. That was bad. And one platoon mentored an entire Afghan Army battalion, and one platoon in the MPs did the police. That stopped that night. What I did was I created a weekly rotation. The MPs were never on it. They always worked with the police and did patrols along the major route in our district with the police. I put one platoon on base defense, which was their rest ready week with their Afghan Army company. I put another platoon on QRF, which was their train up week with their Afghan Army company. So they'd remain in the FOB, ready to go if one of our patrols got in trouble with their Afghan Army unit, but they would do company level, squad, platoon level training, and then one platoon that was on patrols. And the patrol platoon would go in their AO, do village assessment, do patrols in their platoon size AO. The QRF platoon would do 2 patrols a day on and in the district, and I'd make them go to the other 2 platoon AOs just to show a presence, and I'd have the MPs on the road all day. Everyone was gainfully employed.
How did those men view you? Were they happy with this change? Or
Those guys to this day still come up to me and say thank you. That's a fact.
So they were looking for change.
Yep. They were looking for somebody to take care of them. This guy was not taking care of them. But what was unique, I was 3 days there. We started undergoing all these changes, and the Afghan Army Brigade that we were mentoring decided that they were going to go on their own mission up in the valley, Shagulian Valley, and slug it out with the Taliban. They did.
How'd they do?
Not well. 30 guys were taken captive. They lost a ton of equipment, and they came back broken. So that night, the very next day, I was called up, told to get my whole unit ready to go. So I did. Everyone that was available. We did some deception operations because I left some people there in the towers. I made cooks go in the towers, so it looked like we were full up on the base, but we snuck out early morning, so no one could really see us. Blackout drive. We drove up to Methar-Lam and we staged and we waited for our orders. Well, what happened was we had to support the special operations guys to go into the valley and get the equipment that they could and recover it. So my company sat and secured an HLZ for them to do that. We sat there for 3 days and watched them just pull stuff out. Nothing happened. Then we were called back.
Was that equipment American or Afghan?
It was furnished American equipment given to the Afghans. I mean, that's all they had. It was Humvees and stuff that they needed. So we went back. I went back to my FOB. We recovered. And then we got the order that we were going to go in and try to rescue these guys that were taken. So I had been on the ground, I think, little over a week at this point with this new unit. And we got ready to do one of the biggest air assaults in the history of our battalion. I know we're not an air assault unit. And I took over 150 guys, Afghans, U.S., into Shagulian Valley. I don't remember the date, and that stinks. That pisses me off. I don't remember the date. Because I remember it. We flew in.
What month was it?
June, July I moved there. Had to been end of July, August.
So it was summer of 09?
Summer of 10. We land there. I got my 4+ platoons of the Afghans. We land at night. We got the cover. And the other valley special operations guys are over there doing their business. God bless them. And I go in with my full company, ready to go. We take up our defensive perimeter on top of this mountain because they wanted to drop us in the valley, and I and now Major Warner were like, we're not doing that. We're not going to execute the same plan that people have been doing. We're going to land on top. So we landed on top, and that next morning, well, let me back up. That night, we had some contact, and we had, thank God, we had the helicopter pilots, Apache pilots that we had doing what they do best. And I think that moment when I started making the decisions to neutralize targets, that's when Alpha Company started becoming a unit. They knew that, I think, and one of them told me they knew that they had a leader. And I was happy to hear that after the fact. So the next morning, we got everybody ready to go. I put everyone in position, and we went down on top of this village. We came from the top down, and we just started clearing it out. And when I first started getting the initial reports, I kind of thought it was like a training exercise when you're at JRTC or anywhere where there's just tons of weapons and this and that. And I was like, this has got to be a joke. Well, it wasn't. It was real life. There was stacks of AK-47s, RPGs, grenades. We found bomb-making material, tons of money, Afghan cash, video cameras. We ended up, I don't remember the insurgent leader's name, but we ended up catching them at breakfast. We didn't grab them. The food was still hot. And we cleared this whole village, and we blew up so much stuff and captured so much stuff that the division intelligence officer flew in to get it from us because they couldn't believe it. And we surprised them.
Did you rescue the prisoners that they had taken?
We did not particularly get those guys that night. That night, what we had found out was that before we had gotten there, they started moving them over across the mountains. I'm going to get to that. So we cleared this whole village. I couldn't believe the amount of stuff that we found and took, enemy equipment. And we cleared the next couple locations down the valley, and it was over a mile up to get to where we started. And my guys were tired. So we went into the middle of the valley at the highest point on the floor. And at 1900 that night, so we'd been going for 12 straight hours, the helicopters had to go off station, and that's when it started. We started taking rounds from our northeast on a finger. It was our RPK, heavy machine gun. And then I can remember the village seeing the muzzle blast from the AK-47s. What I knew and what they didn't know was that I had a whole nother contingent along where we started from. And they just started pounding the crap out of that entire location we were taking rounds from. And then we started engaging, and we started calling artillery on, and it stopped. It was probably about 5 or 10 minutes. That's as long as it took. And that night, I stayed up most of the night. I had a little bit of sleep. I was exhausted. Everyone was in their patrol base. We didn't have any issues. No one got hurt. And the next morning, I woke them up about 4:30, and I started pushing them up that hill. And they were exhausted. But we had to get up there because I didn't want to stay down on the bottom. So we started walking. We were pushing them. And about 10 o'clock, that's when we started getting shot at from behind. But it wasn't too bad because the rear guard action that I had going on with the NCO back there was handling it as I was pushing people up. And I regret it, I think, to this day. I regret that I didn't control that movement a lot better. But I was lucky no one got hurt or killed. Because then I would have been upset with myself. But it took us over 12 hours to get the last person up that mountain. 12 hours to climb it. Guys were dehydrated. We had to keep pushing them. Guys were fighting the people that were engaging us at the bottom. We finally got that under control. I had to air medevac one guy out because he was dehydrating, couldn't move, but he ended up being fine. We got everybody up there, and we took a breather. What the good thing was is that we got up there, and they weren't coming up. There was no way. and we had the helicopters. And then the next day, the rest of the battalion or Bravo company flowed into the other village where we were getting all the problems from and hit that village. So it was a simultaneous action, and they were successful in what they did there, pretty much the same. And we pretty much took this valley over and seized this terrain for the 5 or 6 days we were out there. We did get contact for the next couple days, but when those guys had landed and we were in place, it really got quiet. And we got radio chatter from the system that picks up what they talk on, saying they were done. They forget fighting for this guy, forget him, forget his family. They were done. And they were packing up and going home. So that had happened, and right behind us, the French army had gotten to the other valley and started going into the other villages right behind it. So it was the French, us, Alpha Company, and Bravo Company. So then we started flowing out. Well, we didn't get those guys, so we started planning follow-on missions and where we were going to go to find these captives. And we started doing other missions and flying to it. Towards the end of all these operations and where we had gone, the Taliban, I call them the Taliban. It's kind of like, every German was a Nazi, and they're the Taliban. Had let the guys go. They had enough. We were on top of them so much that they had enough. They just said enough. They let them go. So then the French that was next to us, Task Force Lafayette, asked us if we could go in and help them. And we did. We flew in the French AO. I don't remember the name of it, but it was called Objective Fly. And we cleared villages in that valley. We took contact there. Both elements did. In the patrol base, we took contact, and during the mission, Bravo Company had taken contact. I had my female engagement team sergeant who, this is bad, I shouldn't be telling you this. My first sergeant, I came up the mountain and I was tired. So I took my helmet off, I took my body armor off, and I was just trying to breathe. And he told me to put it back on, and then like that instant, they started shooting at us. And
did you get it back on in time?
Oh yeah. And within 5 minutes, this girl was shot right in the leg, right next to me, and I was like, I cannot believe this is happening. And she just was like, "Wow, that hurt. What? You didn't? There was no blood. The bullet had gone through her leg, the bottom part of her leg, missed the bone, and went right out the other spot. And it was small entrance, big exit. And she really wasn't bleeding until I think everyone took a pause, and then all of a sudden there was blood. And we actually got her out of the next medevac, and last thing I heard, she was fine. Nothing bad. But we finished that mission. That was a successful mission. And we flew out of there, and we got ready for the next mission, which was I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on all the names of these locations. I have them in my CD and whatnot. I can't remember. And that's when Bravo Company went in to clear this town, Massamoot, that's it. And they got fogged in the weather, and they got caught in a little bit of the low ground, and that's when the Afghans opened up on them. And they were slugging it out with them for a couple hours. And a Captain McMahon, who was the EOD commander, he was fatally wounded and later died. But Colonel Levi came out on the HLZ and said, "Get ready, you're bringing the QRF in, or the relief column," whatever we were calling it at that moment. And I packed up these guys on the bird. I said, "Bring everything. We don't know if we're going to stay or not." because everyone thought, we'll just go light. I said, no, we got to bring everything. I remember it was raining that day too, and they dropped us in a Chinook. The Chinook was taking heavy fire. And we got off the bird, and I didn't know where they were. So I told the guys, just get off the bird and lay down. Don't shoot, lay down until we find out where Bravo Company is. We didn't know where they were. Luckily, we got off the bird, and they were right in front of us in the woods, in the tree line, I guess, hide behind rocks. And I saw behind us we didn't have that ground covered, so I directed my guys to take up the rest of the HLZ, so we had 360 security. And we got into it a little bit up there with them and started directing the helicopter. And I remember the mountain creek that was running through the HLZ because it had rained so much. It was the coldest. It took the breath out of me when I fell in it. I could not believe how cold it was. It was freezing. And we started directing the helicopters to take out certain locations, and we were taking fire, and we did our job. And then the helicopters are called in to come get us. In retrospect, again, we probably should have stayed and cleared that village, but most of the element on the ground was pretty wiped out from the night before. So, in retrospect, what are you going to do? We did our job. Unfortunately, we lost Cap McMahon. So we went back, regrouped. We had the elections. Afghan elections came up, so we had to put a pause on that, and we had to secure the polling stations. And
how did that go?
Not a problem. I didn't have a problem in my district.
No corruption, no.
Corruption. I mean,
no problems at the polling
stations. There was no violence at the polling station. As for corruption, I can't say that there was or wasn't. I had a pretty decent relationship with the leadership in my district, and they knew I meant business, I guess to say. I really didn't tolerate too much stuff. But, I mean, that's what they respect. As from my perspective, I seemed like they respected that. They might have thought I was something behind my back, but they respected it.
When you were on all these missions going to different villages, and when you went to rescue the captives, and when you went to help Bravo Company, would you stay out in the field for multiple days? Or would you go back to base?
Sometimes we stayed out, like that first mission, when we got all that equipment. We were there for 5 or 6 days.
And where do you sleep?
On the ground. I actually slept, I'm not making a joke, we were like a homeless person because I had a tarp. I always keep a tarp in the bottom of my rucksack. It's waterproof. You can sleep on it. Well, we didn't really want to take anything out, so we just slept under the tarp. There was 3 of us. There was Sergeant Soroyce, Lieutenant Taylor, my XO, who was my right-hand man, and myself slept underneath the tarp. My first sergeant for those missions, Sergeant Corey Lewis, Sergeant First Class, now Master Sergeant, he just slept on the ground in all his gear. Some people didn't sleep. They were up, pulling security. They would airlift supplies. We were running low because we usually would pack out a day and a half of water and at least 6 meals. We'd break them down, and then 5 days we'd run out. We ran out of water in the first day because it was so hot, and we were going.
What do you do when you run out of water?
We got resupplied. Well, you keep going until you get a resupply. That's what you do. Thank God we got a resupply.
Now, how did those men operate? Because you had just come in, and they had been under previous lack of leadership. And
how did they operate? The thing is that there was a lack of leadership, but there was good junior leaders and good soldiers. And all they wanted was a leader, and they operated. And they knew my intent. They knew what had to get accomplished, and they did it. As simple as that. Great soldiers. Great soldiers. I think Connecticut has an unbelievable history of the volunteer soldier. Going back to the Revolutionary War. We have some great soldier citizens that come from the state of Connecticut. And I think that tradition continues today as far as what I've seen.
Frank, were you awarded any medals or citations?
My first tour, I was awarded the Bronze Star for Meritorious Service for my time there. I was also awarded an RCOM for an Army Commendation Medal for assisting Afghans. They had gotten caught in a flood, and we were helping pulling them out of the river. So I got an RCOM for that. I was also awarded the Combat Action Badge, which I'm wearing in this interview as an engineer officer. Second tour, I received another Bronze Star for my service. And as an infantry officer, I was awarded the Combat Infantryman's Badge.
Did you sustain any injuries?
Nope, thank God. When I do my water, oh, there it is.
When you were done with your second tour, so when you took over Alpha Company, did you ever go back to your own men, or is that where you finished?
Nope, that's where I finished my second tour, was with Alpha Company. We finished out. I actually got to go on leave. I went to Germany for 2 weeks. It was great. I guess that was a perk. I came back. We finished out the tour. No incidents. We handed over the unit. I was from Iowa. We handed over control. We packed up and we came home. We demobbed at Camp Atterbury, Indiana. I never wanted to see that place again, unfortunately, but we did. And then we came home. And when I came home, I was on terminal leave until February of 2011. And at that point, I had gotten a job at Hamilton Sundstrand doing contracts administration, and I was studying for the bar. And I think I packed on a lot at the beginning when I got home. I probably should have just focused on one thing. So I ended up leaving that job, and I just focused studying on the bar, which is my ultimate goal, to pass, if I practice law or not, but I wanted to pass the bar. And I finished that journey July of 2011, and I passed the first time I took the bar. So you do the math. I started law school 2004, deployed in the middle, finished in 2009. I deployed at the end, so I didn't get to take the bar. And 2 years later, I came home and took the bar and passed. That was a big accomplishment for me.
Did you go on to practice law?
I think at that point in my life, I didn't. I still don't. I then, once I finished studying for the bar, Colonel Yvonne brought me on orders. Major Wilkinson brought me on orders to work at the unit. So I was back on active duty. And I stayed on active duty working at the unit in the Hartford Armory from August of 2011 until April of 2013.
What were your duties?
Oh, I was the personnel officer. I did all administrative actions. And then in the middle of that, I became the operations officer, which I was in charge of all training and the supervision of all execution of training. And then in that time, I got promoted to major, which I was pretty proud of that. May of 2012. And then I decided to apply for a contracting officer's job, a federal contracting officer's job at the Hartford Armory, and I got it in April of 2013. And then a month later, I went off to Denmark to study at the Royal Danish Defence College for a month in Copenhagen. That was kind of great experience.
No, why did you do that? Was that part of your?
No, it was No, it had nothing to do with that. It was an exchange program that I got to take part in. I applied, and they asked me to do that when it was the first time we ever sent anybody to Denmark, the National Guard, I should say. And there was a program at the Royal Danish Defence College, and I got to study there for a month. So,
when you became a federal contracting officer, was it very similar to all the stuff you've been doing?
No.
Completely different.
I'm back to...
Completely different when you're in the world and not a combat zone?
I'm completely learning a new trade. I shouldn't say I don't practice law. I do help veterans out. I try to volunteer at the Veterans Legal Services that they do in Connecticut. I try to help out fellow guardsmen that I know that have family issues or other things at no cost. I give them my humble opinion. I have very little experience, but
you walk the walk as a guardsman.
Yeah.
You know what it's like to be in the military and what they're going through.
For sure. And, I give them my very limited legal opinion on things, and, I don't charge people any money for it.
Frank, are you still active duty?
No, I wouldn't. I'm not active duty. I wear a uniform every day, but I'm a federal technician, which there's two systems in the Guard. You have AGR, Active Guard Reserve, and then you have the Federal Technician Program, which we are dual status, so you have to be in the military, have to wear a uniform, but you're not active duty. So you're still a federal employee, you're just not active duty.
Does it count towards your retirement from the Guard?
No, it's a very complicated system. My active duty time counts towards my federal retirement and my Guard retirement, and it's
so they're two separate.
I have two separate systems, so not too bad, I guess.
And as National Guardsman, do you still have to do the training?
Yep, I still go to drill 1 week in a month. 2 weeks. Well, not in my unit. It's usually a month in the summer now. I'm the battalion executive officer now, so second guy in command of the battalion. In charge of the staff. Really operate, really work on the staff and how they operate and plans and in the military decision-making process, and focus on logistics. So,
what's your opinion of the soldiers that served under you?
I think, and I had all men in my unit, but I also served with female soldiers and officers. And I say this blanket statement, I think they're all outstanding soldiers. I think they're all outstanding American citizens. I mean, we all have our shortcomings and we're all not the best at everything, but they are... I said this once to a news media or a media person when we were in Ghazni. September 11th was the Pearl Harbor of my generation. And you really have to look at it like that. And there were some that chose to wave the flag and support America, but that's the extent of it. And there were some that chose to wave the flag, support their country, and raise their hand and swear into the military to do a job. And I think the soldiers that I had the honor and privilege to lead and serve are some of the best Americans of the age. They're not Harvard Law School graduates. Maybe some turn into that. They're not Yale MBA graduates, and some are going to do that. They're just good Americans that believe in the country and believe that the country was in crisis. And I don't think you could ask for a better citizen to lead than that.
What was your opinion of your fellow officers?
My peers, some of my greatest friends to this day.
Have you stayed in touch with people that you were stationed with over in Afghanistan?
Well, obviously the people in my unit.
Because you still see your unit.
I still see them. They're in the Guard. Some have gotten out that I still stay in contact with. Outside entities, it's a funny relationship that I formed with our active duty brigade commander, who is now a general, that he and I still talk. Not frequently, but enough, in his busy schedule. And some of the other people that we served with in the 101st Airborne.
So are you planning on making the Guard your career?
Well, I already think I made the National Guard my career 15 years in.
So you've been in the Guard 15 years?
Yeah.
now?
And then this job, I think so, yeah. I think it's a right fit for me.
How would you say your military experience has influenced your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Huh. It's an interesting question. How has my military experience influenced my idea about war? Well, again, I think you have to go back to history and understand that war is a constant in human history. My grandmother is 88 years old, and she said something to me that I'll never forget. She goes, in my 88 years on this planet, I don't think I've seen 10 years of peace anywhere. Woman was born in 1925, so she missed the First World War, saw her husband go to the Second World War, saw her brothers go to Korea, saw her son go to Vietnam. You know, you just start ticking away at it. So I think war is a constant. If anybody believes that world peace is going to be achieved anytime in the near future with the volatility of what we have going on now in the world, short resources, the global economy, overpopulation, extremists, which we've had since the dawn of time, I think war is going to be a constant. It's a necessary evil, and I think that it's something that we're going to have to live with. And I think I would be naive to sit here and say that what we did in Afghanistan is going to end it. You know, I think we learned after the Great War that it wasn't the war to end all wars. It was the beginning of a new era of things to come and change. I mean, that really changed the world, that war. It just didn't end wars, so.
Frank, have you joined any veterans organizations?
You know, it's funny you should say that. No, I haven't. I don't belong to the VFW.